The night had stretched longer than usual, almost as if time itself refused to move forward. Daniel sat in the corner of his small apartment, elbows on his knees, fingers tangled in his hair. The dim yellow lamp on the table cast a tired shadow across the room, matching the heaviness in his chest. He had been staring at the same unpaid bill for the last 30 minutes, though the numbers had blurred long ago. Life hadn't always felt this suffocating, but the last few months had squeezed him from every side. Losing his job was the first punch. The savings running out was the second. And the third, watching his mother hide her worry while pretending everything was fine, felt like a punch straight to the soul. He lifted his head slightly, eyes burning, and whispered into the quiet room, "God, what am I supposed to do?" No answer came. Only the ticking of the old wall clock and the hum of the refrigerator. He leaned back against the wall, letting out a slow breath. The apartment felt smaller tonight, as if the walls had moved closer. He rubbed his eyes, trying to push back the sting of tears. He hated feeling weak. He hated feeling lost. But of all things, he hated feeling alone the most. On the small wooden table near him lay his mother's Bible, the one she had given him when he left home at 18. He hadn't opened it in weeks. Not because he didn't believe anymore, but because he didn't know how to believe when everything felt like it was slipping between his fingers. Still, something nudged him. A small thought. A soft pull. Almost like someone whispering, "Just look." He reached for the Bible, the cover soft and familiar from years of use. It flipped open naturally, as if guided by an unseen hand, landing on Hebrews 11. He stared at the page for a long moment. Then he read the first verse slowly, letting each word settle into him. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Something inside him shifted, just a little, like a locked window cracking open. He hadn't realized how much he needed these words until now. He read further. Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah. People who didn't have clear answers. People who didn't see the full picture. People who walked not because the road was visible, but because God had spoken something into their spirit. Daniel closed his eyes. Faith, evidence of things not seen. He whispered under his breath, "Lord, I don't see anything right now. Not even a little hope. How am I supposed to walk forward?" No voice responded, but his heart felt something. A light pressure. A warmth. A presence he hadn't felt in a long time. He opened his eyes again and reread the stories. How Abraham left not knowing where he was going. How Sarah believed even when everything about her body told her it was impossible. How Noah worked for years on something everyone else laughed at. They didn't wait for clarity. They walked while still confused. They trusted while still hurting. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt a hint of strength rise inside him. He stood up slowly, stretching his stiff back. The clock on the wall now read 2:19 a.m., but sleep was the last thing on his mind. He picked up the Bible again, holding it against his chest for a moment. He didn't know why, but he felt like this chapter was speaking directly to him. He walked over to the window. Outside, the street was empty except for a stray cat trotting across the road. The cold night breeze pressed gently against the glass. He whispered, almost without thinking, "God, if you're still leading people like you did back then, lead me too." The moment the words left his mouth, a strange peace settled over him. Not a loud miracle, not a sudden solution, just peace. A gentle assurance, like someone placing a hand on his shoulder and saying, "I'm here." He closed the curtain, turned off the lamp, and walked into the small kitchen. The cold tile under his feet sent a small shiver up his legs, but he didn't mind. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. His mother used to tell him, "Faith doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers." Tonight felt like a whisper. He walked back to the living room and grabbed his old, slightly torn backpack. He packed the Bible, his notebook, a pen, and a small snack. He didn't know why he packed it. Maybe because he felt tomorrow would require a bit more of him. Maybe because he felt he shouldn't step into the day empty-handed. After zipping the bag, he took a deep breath. Something inside him felt different, not fixed, not perfect, but steady. He walked into his bedroom, lay down, and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. His mind wasn't racing like before. His heart wasn't pounding. Instead, he felt as if something invisible had shifted his burden off-center, lightening it enough for him to breathe again. He whispered, "Thank you for whatever this is." Sleep came quietly, like a soft wave pulling him into rest, deep, warm, peaceful. Hours later, the morning sun slipped through the curtains, dusting the room with a golden glow. Daniel blinked awake, surprised at how refreshed he felt. It had been weeks since he'd slept without waking up panicked. He sat up, running a hand through his hair, and glanced at his backpack. For a moment, he wondered what had pushed him to pack it last night. Then he remembered the whisper of peace and Hebrews 11 and that sense that something was beginning. He got dressed and grabbed the backpack. As he stepped out into the morning air, the world looked the same, cars rushing by, people in a hurry, the usual chaos of a new day. But inside him, something had changed. Each step felt like a declaration. A small step forward, a small act of faith, a small answer to the call he felt in his heart. He didn't know what would happen today. He didn't know if he would find a new job. He didn't know if things would get better. But he knew one thing. He wasn't walking alone anymore. As he locked his door and took the first step onto the street, a quiet certainty rose inside him. This is where the journey begins. This is where things start to change. This is where faith becomes real. And with the hum of the morning city around him, he walked forward, carrying nothing more than a backpack, a Bible, and a mustard seed of faith that Hebrews 11 had awakened inside him. His story had begun, and he didn't even know that this first step was about to lead him into something far bigger than anything he had imagined. Daniel stepped onto the street with a quiet determination humming inside him. The air carried a slight chill, but he didn't pull his jacket tighter. For the first time in a long while, the cold didn't bother him. Instead, it felt fresh, like the beginning of something he couldn't name yet. He didn't really have a plan. Just the backpack on his shoulder, the Bible inside it, and a sense that today demanded movement. Maybe that was faith too, taking a step even when you didn't know where it would lead. He walked past a row of small shops. The bakery on the corner was already open, the smell of warm bread drifting out. An old man sweeping the front sidewalk gave him a nod. Daniel returned the nod with a small smile. He kept walking, letting his feet choose the direction on their own. Somehow, instead of heading toward the busier parts of the city, he found himself walking toward the old district, quiet streets lined with old buildings and trees that had seen better days. As he walked, he thought about Hebrews 11 again, about people who didn't wait for signs or perfect moments. They just moved. He whispered to himself, "Okay, God, I'm moving. You take the lead." A little farther down the road, he noticed a small park. It wasn't much, just a few benches, a fountain that no longer worked, and a playground with faded paint. Yet something about it pulled him in. He entered the park and sat on one of the benches. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees, casting soft shadows on the path. For a moment, he simply breathed, slow, deep, steady. He reached into his backpack and took out the Bible. It naturally opened to Hebrews 11 again. Before he could read, he heard footsteps. A woman sat on the bench across from him. She looked tired, eyes slightly red, shoulders tense, holding a folder close to her chest like it contained her whole world. They didn't speak at first, but after a minute, she glanced at the Bible in his hands. "Faith chapter?" she asked with a faint, tired smile. Daniel blinked, surprised. "Yeah, Hebrews 11. She exhaled slowly, nodding. "My mom used to read that to me when things got bad." He closed the Bible gently. "Rough morning, rough year," she said with a sad chuckle. "I'm on my way to a job interview. Third one this month. I keep praying, but nothing works out." Daniel felt something stir in his chest. This was familiar. Too familiar. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Rachel." "I'm Daniel." She gave a small nod, then looked down at the folder again. "I almost canceled this interview. I just don't feel strong anymore." Daniel didn't think before speaking. The words seemed to come from somewhere deeper than him. Maybe strength comes when you walk anyway. She looked up, eyes glistening. He continued gently. I lost my job too. I know what it feels like to think nothing's going to change. But last night, I felt something, like God was reminding me that faith isn't about everything being clear. It's just taking one step. Rachel stared at him for a long moment. Then she wiped her eyes and whispered, maybe that's why I met you this morning. He felt the same thought echo in his heart. She took a deep breath and stood. Thank you, Daniel. He smiled. You've got this. Walk in faith, even if it's shaking. She let out a soft laugh. I will. And with one last look, she walked out of the park, shoulders a little lighter. Daniel watched her leave, then leaned back and looked up at the sky. Okay, God, he murmured. So, this is what you wanted me to do? Encourage someone? Was that the step? But something inside him quietly answered. It was the first step, not the last. He closed the Bible and stood up, slinging the backpack over his shoulder again. As he stepped out of the park, he noticed a small board near the sidewalk outside an old community center. Volunteers needed, food program for families in need. He paused. His heart nudged. Not a push, just a whisper. He walked toward the building. The inside smelled like old wood and coffee. A few people were moving boxes, arranging food items, sorting supplies. A middle-aged man saw him and walked over. Morning, the man said, wiping his hands on his apron. You here to help? Daniel hadn't planned this, but the answer came out easily. Yeah, I think so. The man smiled warmly. I'm Victor. We can always use more hands. You can start with sorting these boxes. For the next 2 hours, Daniel lifted boxes, arranged shelves, packed bags, and helped distribute food to people who came through the doors, tired mothers, struggling fathers, elderly people living alone. Every face told a different story of hardship. But something strange happened. With each person Daniel helped, the heaviness in his chest grew lighter. A quiet joy settled in him, simple, steady, grounding. Almost like breathing clean air after being stuck in a dusty room. Around noon, when things slowed, Victor handed him a bottle of water. You're good at this, he said. First time volunteering? Daniel nodded. Yeah, I just felt like I needed to be here today. Victor gave him an understanding look. Sometimes God leads us before we understand why. Daniel smiled faintly. Yeah, I'm learning that. Victor patted his shoulder. If you're looking for work, the shelter next block might need part-time help. They've been short-staffed. The words hit Daniel like a gentle spark. Work. A job. A possibility he hadn't expected today. Really? He asked. Yeah. Talk to Linda there. Tell her Victor sent you. Daniel thanked him and stepped outside. As he walked toward the shelter, he realized something. He had started the morning with zero direction. Now he had a lead, small, but real. And deep in his spirit, he heard it again. Walk with me. He reached the shelter, a modest brick building with a faded sign. He took a deep breath and walked in. Inside, a woman was sorting papers at a desk. She looked up. Hi there. Can I help you? I heard you might need someone for part-time work. Victor from the food center told me. Her eyes brightened slightly. Oh. Yes, we actually do. Can you wait a moment? She disappeared into an office and returned with a short woman with gray hair and sharp yet kind eyes. I'm Linda, she said. So, Victor sent you? Daniel nodded. Well, she said, folding her arms, tell me a little about yourself. He wasn't prepared, but he spoke honestly about losing his job, helping his mom, struggling but not giving up. He kept it simple, real, unpolished. Linda watched him carefully. After a moment, she said, we need someone compassionate, someone patient, someone who actually cares. She paused. You seem like that kind of person. Daniel felt his heartbeat pick up. She continued, it's part-time work for now, not great pay, but steady and meaningful. Daniel swallowed. I'd really appreciate the chance. Linda smiled. Then the job is yours. For a second, he couldn't speak. It felt unreal. He managed a quiet, thank you so much. As he stepped out of the shelter building, sunlight warmed his face. He stopped, closed his eyes, and exhaled shakily. God had opened a door. Not a loud miracle, but a gentle one. A door he wouldn't have found if he hadn't taken that one small step this morning. He walked back toward the park, wanting a quiet place to sit. Under a tree, he took out his Bible again and looked at Hebrews 11, but this time, the words felt personal. Abraham walked, not knowing the land ahead. Noah built something he didn't understand. Moses trusted a God he couldn't see. Daniel whispered, "You're writing my faith story too, aren't you?" A breeze swept through the trees, rustling the leaves like a soft answer. He leaned against the tree and let his heart rest. For the first time in months, he felt grounded.
Seen. Led.
As the afternoon sun dipped lower, Daniel knew something. Today wasn't the end of the story. It wasn't even the main part. It was just the next chapter in a journey God had already started long before he realized it. He stood up, slung the backpack over his shoulder again, and murmured, "This is only the beginning." Daniel stepped out of the park slowly, almost as if he didn't want to disturb the quiet peace sitting inside him. The sunlight had softened into a warm afternoon glow, brushing against the sidewalks and rooftops like a gentle blessing. Everything around him looked ordinary, cars rolling by, people hurrying along, kids laughing in the distance. But to him, the whole city felt different now.
Alive.
Almost like God had opened a window inside his chest that had been shut for too long. He kept walking, not toward any particular place, but simply following the pull inside him. The world felt wide again, like something new was approaching, even if he didn't know what it was. As he reached the main street, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He hesitated before pulling it out. Most days, a message meant another reminder of something he couldn't fix. But this time it was his mother. "How's your day, son?" Just reading her text made his throat tighten a little. She had been trying so hard to stay strong for him. He typed slowly. "Better than usual. Something good happened." Her reply came almost instantly. "I knew God would make a way. You sounded different last night, lighter." Daniel paused, remembering how he'd fallen asleep after reading Hebrews 11, how the burden had shifted just enough for him to breathe. His eyes softened as he typed, "I'll tell you everything later. Love you." He put his phone away and walked on, feeling a small warmth spreading in his chest. It had been a long time since he'd been able to say something positive to her. A bus wheeled past him, releasing a soft hiss of air as it stopped. People stepped on, some tired, some restless, some lost in their own storms. Daniel didn't get on. Not because he didn't have anywhere to go, but because he felt like he needed to walk a little more, let the day unfold naturally. He crossed the street and entered a quieter neighborhood lined with small shops and cafes. One coffee shop caught his eye, not because of the decor, but because of the sign taped to the window. "Tonight, open discussion, stories of faith in hard times. All welcome." His heart stirred at the words. Faith. Hard times. Stories. Everything he had been living, everything God was awakening in him. Right there on a handwritten poster. He stood at the window, unsure. He wasn't the type to speak in groups. And sharing something personal? That wasn't him. But the tug inside wouldn't go away. Before he could overthink it, he pushed the door open. A small bell chimed above him. The place smelled like cinnamon and roasted coffee beans. A man behind the counter gave him a friendly nod. "Looking for something special?" the man asked. Daniel glanced back at the sign. "Yeah, I saw the poster outside." The barista smiled. "Oh, the faith group? They meet here at 6 sharp every Thursday. You thinking of joining?" Daniel hesitated. "Maybe. Not sure yet." "No pressure," the barista said kindly. "Just folks sharing their stories. Helps to know you're not the only one going through stuff." Daniel nodded slowly. He knew that feeling too well, living inside your struggles, thinking you're the only one sinking. He looked around the cafe, a mix of wooden tables, warm lights, and people tapping on laptops or talking quietly. It felt safe.
Warm. Human.
"I might come back later," he said. "You're welcome anytime," the barista replied. Daniel stepped outside again, feeling that same quiet pull inside him. He didn't know why, but he felt like tonight's meeting would matter. As he walked back toward the busier street, his mind drifted to everything that had happened since morning. The girl in the park, the volunteering, the part-time job offer. It all felt woven together somehow, like God had been stitching pieces of a story he hadn't even known he was part of. His stomach growled, breaking his thoughts. He laughed softly to himself and wandered toward a small food stall. An older woman stood behind the counter, flipping flatbreads on a hot pan. "What can I get for you, dear?" she asked with a warm smile. Daniel ordered something simple and cheap. As she handed him the food, she paused and looked at him more closely. "You look like someone who just got good news," she said. Daniel chuckled softly. "Something like that." "Hold on to it," the woman said, as if she sensed something deeper. "Life hits hard, but one good thing can carry you farther than you think." He nodded, touched by her simple wisdom. As he walked away eating, he thought about her words. One good thing. Maybe God didn't need to flood your life with miracles, just enough light to show you the next step. By the time he reached the corner of a street, he realized he didn't want to go home yet. Not while the day still carried this quiet hum of possibility. So he turned left instead of right. He found himself near the community center again. People were leaving now, carrying bags of food. He watched as a young mother tried to juggle a bag of supplies while calming her crying toddler. Instinctively, Daniel walked over. "Do you need help?" he asked gently. She looked up, tired but grateful. "Yes, please. Thank you." He carried the bag for her while she soothed the little boy. Once she reached her bus stop, she gave him a warm smile. "You're a blessing," she said before stepping on the bus. Daniel didn't know what to say. He just watched them leave and whispered in his heart, "Lord, if this is where you want me, I'm here." He spent the next hour helping whoever needed an extra hand, lifting boxes into cars, holding the door for an elderly man, offering a smile where he could. None of it was grand. None of it was dramatic. But all of it felt right. Like this was the kind of faith Hebrews 11 was teaching him, faith that didn't just believe but moved, lifted, reached, touched. As the sky slowly turned orange and purple, he realized it was almost time for the meeting at the cafe. Something inside him tightened. Not fear, but a mix of nerves and curiosity. He walked back to the cafe, his steps slower now. When he entered, the bell above the door chimed again. The barista looked up and grinned. "You came." Daniel smiled softly. "Yeah, thought I should." A few people had already gathered around a set of pushed-together tables. There was a middle-aged man with a notebook, a young woman with headphones around her neck, an older couple holding hands, and a teenage boy looking anxious. Daniel took a seat quietly at the far end. A woman with kind eyes, a leader, it seemed, stood and welcomed everyone. "Thank you for coming. Tonight, we're sharing chapters of our faith journeys. Not sermons. Just real life, real struggles, real hope." Daniel felt something twist gently inside him. One by one, people began sharing. The older man talked about losing his wife and how faith pulled him through his darkest nights. The teenage boy spoke about anxiety and praying for strength. The young woman shared how she'd felt lost for years, but found light in a moment she couldn't explain. Their words weren't polished. They weren't perfect, but they were real. When it was Daniel's turn, he didn't expect to speak. He opened his mouth only to say, "Pass," but instead, something else came out. Quiet, steady. "I didn't think I'd be here tonight." The room fell gently silent. He continued, "Last night, I felt like I was drowning. I didn't know how to take another step. But Hebrews 11, it pulled something awake in me.
And today,
I walked. I didn't know where I was going, but I walked. And somehow, God met me along the way."
he told them about the park.
About Rachel. About the volunteering. About the job offer. About the piece he still didn't fully understand. When he finished, the room was quiet. Not the heavy silence of awkwardness, but the soft silence of people listening with their hearts. The leader smiled warmly. "Thank you. That's faith. Not the loud kind. The living kind." Daniel felt a warmth behind his eyes and looked down, blinking away the emotion tightening his throat. After the meeting, people came to shake his hand, offer a word of encouragement, smile at him like they understood his journey. He hadn't felt community like this in a long time. As he stepped outside after the meeting, the night breeze wrapped around him like a cool blanket. The city lights flickered softly, cars hummed by, and the world felt wide again. He walked slowly, letting everything settle inside him. Halfway down the street, he stopped and closed his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, not because everything was perfect, not because all his problems were solved, but because he felt held. He walked toward home under the soft glow of streetlights, a deep stillness resting inside him. And long before he reached his building, he knew something for certain. Faith had begun its work in him. Quietly,
steadily,
powerfully. This wasn't the end of his struggle, but it was the beginning of his rising. And the journey was far from over. The night settled deeper around them, but the two kept walking, following the narrow mountain trail that twisted between the rocks. The storm had finally pulled away, leaving the world washed and still. The air felt newly born, soft and cool, as if God himself had breathed peace into it after the long fight with thunder. The traveler walked slowly, as though each step carried the weight of memories, questions, and half-healed wounds. The guide, a step ahead, moved with quiet confidence, as if he already knew what the traveler would ask before the words even formed. They reached a ridge where the land opened wide beneath them. Valleys stretched in every direction, shadows pooling like dark lakes. Above, the sky flickered with faint stars. The traveler stopped, taking in the view, breathing deeply. For the first time in a long stretch of days, the silence didn't scare him. The guide watched him for a moment, then said softly, "You feel it, don't you?" The traveler nodded. "It's like something heavy just let go." "That's what happens," the guide replied, "when faith starts to wake up again." The words sank deep, stirring something fragile inside the traveler, something that had been buried under disappointment and tired prayers that felt unanswered. They moved to a flat rock near the edge and sat. The stone was cool beneath them. The wind brushed past, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. The traveler hugged his knees to his chest, staring into the wide darkness. "Back there," he said quietly, "when the storm was raging and everything felt like it was falling apart, you told me faith is a choice you make in the middle of fear. But what if fear keeps coming back? What if it doesn't stop?" The guide didn't answer right away. He picked up a small pebble and rolled it between his fingers. "Fear doesn't leave," he said finally. "It learns to step aside when faith takes the lead. But it never disappears completely." "That sounds exhausting." "It is," the guide admitted with a soft laugh. "But you're not doing it alone. You're not supposed to." The traveler let the words settle. For a long time, he had walked through life believing he had to hold everything together by himself. His struggles, his hopes, his failures, his faith. He never said it out loud, but in his heart, he believed God only helped those who already seemed strong. So, the traveler asked, voice low, when Hebrews 11 talks about those people, Noah, Abraham, Moses, were they afraid? Like me? They were terrified, the guide answered instantly. Every single one of them. The traveler looked over, surprised. Abraham, the guide continued, left his home without a map. Moses stood before a king who could have killed him. Noah built something no one had ever seen, while everyone mocked him. Sarah waited decades for a promise she wasn't sure would ever come. These people weren't fearless. They were faithful. The traveler swallowed, staring down at his hands. Sometimes, he whispered, I think God expects too much from me. No, the guide said, leaning forward. He expects you to trust him with what you can't carry. A long silence fell between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, more like a gentle pause where the heart starts sorting itself out. After a moment, the traveler whispered, I've been praying for something for years, asking God to change a situation, but nothing happens, not even a sign. Sometimes I think he doesn't hear me. The guide's expression softened. Do you know what the chapter says about those heroes? The traveler waited. Many of them never saw the promise in their lifetime, but they still believed. They trusted God beyond what their eyes could see. That's hard. Yes, the guide said, but it's also freedom. Because your faith doesn't depend on outcomes. It depends on Him. The wind blew lightly, lifting a stray strand of the traveler's hair. He closed his eyes, letting the breeze cool his face. Somewhere in the valley below, a single owl called, a soft, lonely sound echoing through the night. The traveler whispered, almost to himself, "What if God is waiting for me to become stronger first?" The guide shook his head slowly. He meets you where you are, even if you're barely holding on. Sometimes, He lets the struggle stay because the struggle grows your faith deeper than comfort ever could. The traveler breathed out, tired but strangely relieved. The guide stood up.
"Come," he said.
"There's something I want to show you." They climbed further up the mountain, following a trail that narrowed into a thin path bordered by wildflowers still wet from rain. The moon slipped free from a cloud, shining gently over the world like a watchful eye. After a few minutes, they reached a small plateau. At the center stood a quiet, wooden structure. Not a house, not a temple, but something in between. It felt ancient, like it had stood there longer than memory. "What is this place?" the traveler asked. "A place people come to when they're on the edge of giving up," the guide said. "Those who walked before you, those heroes of faith, they passed through places like this too." The traveler stepped closer. The wooden door creaked softly as he pushed it open. Inside, the room was simple, carved stone floor, a faint glow of lanterns, and a single bench facing a window that framed the night sky perfectly. The traveler sat, running his fingers across the smooth wood. The guide remained standing near the door. "Sit with your heart open," he said gently. "This is where the next part of your faith begins." The traveler looked out through the window. Stars shimmered like quiet promises. The silence inside the room felt sacred, like something unseen brushed through the air. "What do I do here?" he asked. "Tell God the truth," the guide said simply. "Not the prayer you think He wants. The one that's raw and real." The traveler hesitated, then let out a small laugh, shaky and sad. "If I said everything I feel, it wouldn't sound holy." "That's okay," the guide whispered. "Honesty is holier than perfection." The traveler lowered his head. His throat tightened. His eyes stung. For a moment, he tried to hold it all inside, the old fears, the silent disappointments, the moments where he questioned everything. But something cracked, and it all poured out. "I'm tired," he whispered. "I'm so tired of pretending to be strong. I've carried this pain for so long that I don't even remember what peace feels like. I keep asking and asking, but I don't know if you're even listening." Tears slipped down his cheeks. He didn't hide them. "I want to trust you," he said, voice trembling. "I really do. But I'm scared. What if you don't come through? What if I believe again, and my heart breaks again?" He wiped his face with his sleeve. "I feel small. I feel weak. And I don't know what to do anymore." The room went still. Deeply, profoundly still. Then something gentle, almost invisible, touched the traveler's heart. Not a voice, not a vision, but a quiet certainty, like warmth spreading through cold. Like a hand on his soul saying, "I am here." The traveler lifted his head, eyes soft, breathing steadier than before. The guide watched quietly. "You felt that, didn't you?" The traveler nodded slowly. "Yes, like something inside settled." "That," the guide said, "is the beginning of trust." The traveler looked out the window again. Stars glimmered, steady and bright. "Do you think God will answer my prayer?" he asked. "Sometimes," the guide said, "the answer comes in a different form than you expect. Sometimes He changes the situation. Sometimes He changes you. Either way, He never leaves you empty." The traveler nodded, absorbing the words like medicine. They stayed in the quiet room for a while longer, the night unfolding around them like a soft blanket. The traveler didn't feel fixed, but he felt less alone, and that was something. Finally, the guide stepped forward.
"Come," he said.
"There's more ahead. This is just the middle." The traveler rose, feeling a strange mixture of weariness and hope. As they stepped outside, The night greeted them with cool air and the soft rustle of leaves. The guide walked ahead, lantern in hand, its glow spilling warm light on the path. "Where are we going now?" the traveler asked. "To a place where faith becomes action," the guide replied. "You've spoken the truth. Now you'll learn to walk in it." The traveler followed, quietly determined. The path stretched forward, winding into deeper shadows, but something inside him, something small and flickering, began to glow. It wasn't confidence. It wasn't strength. It was faith, fragile but alive. And for the first time, the traveler felt ready to see where it would lead. The lantern swung gently in the guide's hand as they moved deeper into the narrow trail, its warm glow brushing the trees with strokes of gold. The traveler walked a step behind, watching the ground carefully. The night was darker here, wrapped in the heavy quiet of thick woods. Owls called from unseen branches. Leaves whispered with each passing breeze. But the traveler didn't feel afraid the way he would have earlier. Something inside him felt steadier now, like the ground beneath him had stopped shaking. The guide paused at a fork in the trail. One path was smooth and wide, sloping gently downward. The other was steep, winding upward between rough rocks and tangled roots. The traveler looked at both, then at the guide. "We're taking the hard one, aren't we?" The guide smiled with a hint of mischief. "You already knew that." The traveler sighed through a soft laugh. "Of course." As they started up the rugged path, the lantern light flickered across the stones. The traveler stumbled once, catching himself on a root. The guide slowed his pace, letting the traveler find his rhythm. "You said faith becomes action now," the traveler said after a few minutes. "What does that mean?" The guide tapped the lantern lightly with his finger. "It means you keep moving even when the light only shows the next few steps, not the whole way. That's hard. That's faith." They climbed higher, the trail narrowing into a ledge that wrapped around the mountain. The wind picked up, brushing their clothes and making the lantern's flame dance wildly. The traveler stepped closer to the rock wall, suddenly aware of the drop beside him. "Don't look down," the guide said calmly. "I wasn't planning to," the traveler muttered. "You're doing fine," the guide added. The traveler didn't answer, but the reassurance warmed something inside him. A few more minutes passed before the guide stopped again. He pointed ahead at a fallen tree blocking the path. It was thick, heavy, and covered in moss. The traveler frowned. "We can go around, right?" "No," the guide said. "This is your first step." "My what?" "The first step of faith in action." The traveler blinked at him. "By climbing over a tree?" "It's never about the tree," the guide said gently. "It's about your willingness." The traveler stared at the obstacle. It wasn't impossible, just inconvenient. Maybe even annoying. But as he looked at it, something clicked. "This is like those small battles," he said slowly. "The ones you don't want to fight, but have to." "Exactly." The traveler placed his hands on the rough bark and pulled himself up. His shoes slipped once, but he tried again. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't heroic. But he got over it. When his feet touched the ground on the other side, he felt strangely proud. The guide climbed over easily and joined him.
"See," he said.
"Faith doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just tries again." The traveler smiled. "So, what's next?" "You'll see." They continued up the path until the woods opened into a small clearing. In the center stood a simple wooden post with 2 ropes tied to it. The ropes stretched across a dark gap, a narrow ravine carved deep between 2 rocks. The ropes formed a shaky footbridge made of old planks, some missing, some cracked. The traveler froze.
"No."
"Absolutely not." The guide raised a brow. "Not a fan of heights." "This is worse than heights," the traveler said. "This is death with extra steps." The guide chuckled softly. "It's safe." "It does not look safe." "Appearances," the guide said slowly, "are often the enemy of faith." The traveler stared at the bridge, heart thudding. The gap wasn't enormous, but it was deep enough to make his stomach churn. The planks creaked in the breeze, mocking him. "Can't we go around?" the traveler whispered.
"No."
"This is where you learn to step without certainty." The traveler swallowed hard. His palms felt sweaty. What if I fall? Then I'll catch you. The words were simple, but they struck deep. The guide didn't sound like he was offering reassurance. He sounded like he was stating a fact. Still, fear clawed at the traveler's chest. I don't know if I can do this, he said. Yes, you can. What if my legs shake? They will. What if I panic halfway? You might. The traveler looked at him, desperate. Then how do I do it? One step at a time, the guide said softly. And don't look at the gap. Look at me. The traveler hesitated for a long, trembling moment. Then, slowly, he placed one foot on the first plank. It sagged slightly beneath his weight. He gasped and stepped back instantly. The guide held out a hand. Try again. The traveler breathed out shakily and stepped forward again. This time, he didn't retreat. His weight settled onto the board. It held. He took another step. Then another. Each plank creaked, but held. The ropes trembled under his grip. The gap below swallowed the moonlight, deep and silent. Halfway across, his breath quickened. His legs shook. His throat tightened. I can't, he whispered. Yes, you can, the guide said from the opposite side. His voice was calm, steady, certain. You're not alone. The traveler squeezed his eyes shut and moved his foot. Another step, then another. When he finally reached the other side, he stumbled onto solid ground and dropped to his knees, breathing hard. The guide kneeled beside him and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You did it. I thought I was going to die, the traveler said, laughing breathlessly. But you didn't, the guide replied with a soft smile. Because faith doesn't end in fear, it moves through it. The traveler sat back, letting the cool night air settle around him. His heart still raced, but he felt stronger somehow, like a part of him that had been sleeping was finally waking up. After a few minutes, the guide stood and motioned for him to follow. They walked along a flatter stretch of path until they reached a small wooden shelter built beneath a tall oak tree. Inside, there was a simple table, 2 seats, and a lantern waiting unlit. Sit, the guide said. The traveler did. The guide lit the lantern, filling the shelter with warm, soft light. This, the guide said, is where you learn the next lesson. The traveler leaned forward. What lesson is that? Faith listens. The traveler frowned. I've been praying for years. I listen all the time. The guide shook his head. You've been waiting for answers. That's different. The traveler's brow furrowed. Listening, the guide said gently, is letting your heart become quiet enough for God's whisper to reach you. He tapped the table lightly. Close your eyes. The traveler hesitated, then obeyed. The guide's voice softened. Tell me what you hear. The traveler strained his ears. Wind, crickets, leaves. Good. Now listen deeper. He tried again. Minutes passed. Something inside him slowly calmed, a stillness spreading through him. After a while, he whispered, there's a softness, like silence with weight. He paused. And I feel peace. Not loud, just present. That, the guide said, is God speaking without words. The traveler opened his eyes. They felt warmer, clearer. You think faith grows in miracles, the guide continued. But most of the time, it grows in quiet moments like this. The traveler leaned back, letting those words sink in. After a pause, he asked quietly, is that how those people in Hebrews 11 lived? Listening like this? Yes, the guide said. They walked with God, not because he shouted, but because they recognized his gentle nudge. The lantern flickered softly. The guide went on. Now you must learn something harder. The traveler braced himself. Harder than the bridge. The guide smiled. Much harder. He stood and looked out into the night. Faith requires obedience, he said quietly, even when the instruction makes no sense. The traveler's stomach tightened. Obedience to what? To what God places in your heart, the guide said. To the prompts you feel. To the direction you sense. To the steps that feel too small or too strange. The traveler swallowed, uneasy. But what if I get it wrong? You will, the guide said simply. Everyone does. but that's how you learn his voice. The traveler leaned forward, elbows on the table. What if I hesitate? What if I move too slow? God works with movement, the guide said. Even small steps count. The night wind blew softly through the shelter. Come, the guide said finally. There's more. They walked again, moving through the trees until they reached a hill overlooking the valley. Down below, faint lights shone from distant villages. The traveler sat on a patch of soft grass. The guide stood beside him, looking at the horizon. Do you know what faith gives you? The guide asked. The traveler looked up. Courage. More than that. Strength. Sometimes. The guide smiled faintly. But faith's greatest gift is clarity. The traveler's breath caught. Clarity.
Yes.
The ability to see beyond what's happening to what God is doing. To lift your eyes above the struggle. To understand that your story isn't stuck, it's unfolding. The words sank deep into the traveler's heart. Pain, disappointment, unanswered prayers. They all felt connected now, threads of something bigger. The wind changed direction, carrying the scent of rain from somewhere far away. The traveler looked up at the guide. What happens next? He asked. The guide turned to him, lantern casting a soft glow over his face. Next, the guide said, you face the place where every believer must go. The traveler's breath tightened. Where is that? The Valley of Surrender. The traveler's heart fluttered. Why surrender? Because, the guide said gently, faith becomes unbreakable when you surrender what you can't control. The traveler felt a quiet ache inside. He knew exactly which part of his life the guide was talking about. The one thing he had held so tightly it had stolen his peace. When do we go? He whispered. The guide stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. We begin now, he said softly. The lantern flickered. The night deepened. And the traveler felt the weight of the next path settle into his soul. Heavy, yes, but filled with a strange and trembling hope. The night held its breath as the guide's hand rested on the traveler's shoulder. The lantern flickered in the wind, casting their shadows long across the hill. The traveler felt something shifting inside him. Not fear, not quite sadness, but a deep awareness that something sacred was beginning. He looked toward the valley stretching below, dark and quiet like an ocean of shadows. So this is the Valley of Surrender? He whispered. Not yet, the guide said softly, but we walk toward it now. The traveler nodded slowly, trying to steady his breathing. He rose to his feet, brushing the grass off his hands. The lantern's glow settled on his face, revealing the mixture of uncertainty and fragile hope that had been steadily growing since the journey began. They descended the hill in silence, the soft crunch of earth under their shoes blending with the night wind. Trees thickened around them, their branches arching overhead like a quiet cathedral. The forest felt different here, deeper, older, as if countless stories had passed beneath these branches long before the traveler ever took this path. After a while, the traveler asked quietly, why is surrender so important? The guide didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowed his steps, allowing the traveler to walk beside him. Because, he said eventually, there are burdens you're never meant to carry on your back. Only in surrender do you learn that God is not only the giver of strength, but the one who carries what you cannot. The traveler let out a shaky breath. I'm afraid of letting go. That fear, the guide said, is the sign that you're holding on to something too tightly. They kept walking until the forest opened into a narrow field bathed in moonlight. Soft grass rolled gently under the breeze. Fireflies drifted lazily, blinking like tiny wandering stars. At the center of the field stood an old stone well, covered in ivy and moss. The traveler paused. What is this place? A resting point, the guide said, before the valley. The traveler walked closer to the well and ran his hand along the rough stones. Something about it felt familiar, as if he'd been here in a dream long ago. The guide stepped beside him. Sit. The traveler lowered himself onto the edge of the well. The stone was cool beneath him. You've been carrying something, the guide said quietly. Something heavy, something you've prayed about over and over. The traveler stared down at the dark circle inside the well. Yes. You think surrender means losing, the guide said. But surrender means trusting God to hold the pieces that are breaking your hands. The traveler's throat tightened. But what if it's something I want to protect? Then ask yourself, the guide replied gently, has holding it brought you peace? The traveler shook his head, tears already pricking at his eyes. No, he whispered, it's only made me tired. The guide sat beside him. Then surrender isn't loss. It's relief. A long, trembling silence followed. The traveler finally said, how do I let go? The guide placed the lantern between them. Its warm light flickered softly on their faces. Letting go begins with honesty, he said. Not the polished kind. The painful kind. The traveler took a deep breath. His voice came out small. I don't know if I trust God enough. That's honest, the guide said. And honesty is where faith grows. The traveler stared at the ground. His fingers twisted together in his lap. I've been praying for something so deeply for so long. And I'm scared that surrender means God will take it away. The guide shook his head. Surrender doesn't mean losing the thing you love. It means placing it in the safest hands. The hands that shaped your life before you even knew how to pray. The traveler lifted his eyes, filled with quiet pain. What if he says no? Then his no, the guide said with a soft smile, is the doorway to a better yes. The traveler swallowed hard. He wasn't convinced yet, but the words softened something inside him. The guide stood.
Come.
There's something I want you to see. They followed a narrow path out of the field. The trees grew taller here, their trunks thick and twisted like they'd been standing for centuries. The air felt cooler. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, scattering into soft patches on the forest floor. After some time, they reached a large wooden gate. It wasn't tall or imposing, just simple, weathered, and old. Its frame was carved with symbols the traveler didn't recognize. The traveler frowned. What's behind it? The valley, the guide said. The traveler felt a shiver run through him. And once we enter, I'll have to surrender? Yes. The traveler stepped closer to the gate. His hand hovered over the wood, but he didn't touch it. I'm not ready. That's why we're here, the guide replied. Faith doesn't wait for readiness. It grows through the trembling. He gently placed his hand over the traveler's. You won't walk this valley alone. The traveler closed his eyes and breathed slowly. When he opened them again, his gaze steadied. Okay, he whispered. Let's go. Together, they pushed open the gate. It creaked softly, revealing a wide valley bathed in moonlight. The grass swayed like a silver sea. Mist curled low over the ground. In the distance, a small river shimmered, winding through the valley like a ribbon of light. The traveler stepped inside. The air felt different here, quieter, heavier, like the valley carried the weight of thousands of whispered prayers. This place, the guide said gently, is where many people before you have come when the heart is tired. The traveler walked slowly, looking around. He noticed small wooden markers scattered throughout the valley, some close together, others standing alone. Each one had a single word carved on it.
Hope. Fear.
Dreams.
Pain. Loss.
Trust. What are these? The traveler asked softly. Surrenders, the guide replied. Each marker represents something someone chose to place into God's hands. The traveler stopped beside one that read fear. The wood was cracked, the letters worn smooth. So people actually left things here? Yes, the guide said. Not physically, but spiritually. The traveler ran his finger over the carved letters, feeling the quiet weight behind them. The guide continued, the valley does not take anything away. It only teaches you that the one who walks with you is greater than whatever you release. The traveler's chest tightened. He whispered, I don't know if I can let go. You can, the guide said softly, because surrender isn't an event. It's a posture. The traveler sat on the grass. The guide sat beside him. The valley was silent except for the distant murmur of water. After a long moment, the guide asked, what is the one thing you are afraid to surrender? The traveler didn't answer immediately. His fingers traced the blades of grass. His voice trembled as he finally whispered, "My deepest prayer." "Tell me," the guide said. The traveler took a shaky breath. "I've prayed for this one thing, begged for it at times. It feels like my whole heart is tied to it. If I let it go, I'm afraid I'll break." "You won't," the guide said gently. "But clinging to it is already breaking you." Tears filled the traveler's eyes again. "If I surrender it, does that mean God won't give it to me?" "No," the guide said. "It means you trust him to decide how and when." The traveler wiped his eyes. "I don't want to lose it." "You're not losing it," the guide replied. "You're placing it in the hands of the one who loves you more than you understand." The traveler looked up at the sky. Stars twinkled faintly through thin clouds. His voice cracked. "I don't know how to let it go." "Then let God take it," the guide whispered.
"He knows how."
The traveler inhaled deeply, holding the air in his lungs until his chest ached. Then he exhaled slowly, shakily. "What do I do?" he whispered. "Speak it," the guide said. "Tell God exactly what you're surrendering." The traveler hesitated, then bowed his head. "God," he breathed, voice trembling, "I give you the thing I've been holding onto with both hands. The thing I've cried over. The thing I've begged you for. I place it in your hands, even though I don't know what you'll do with it. I'm scared, but I trust you. Do what is right, even if I don't understand it." When he finished, he felt something loosen inside his chest, like a knot untying after years of tightening. His shoulders lowered. His breath softened. The guide watched him quietly. "You feel lighter, don't you?" The traveler nodded slowly, surprised.
"Yes."
"A little." "That is surrender," the guide said. They sat together for a long time, the valley holding their silence like a sacred promise. Eventually, the guide stood and offered his hand. The traveler took it. "Is it over?" the traveler asked. "No," the guide said. "Surrender is not the end of the valley. It is the beginning." "What's next?" "We walk," the guide said, "until the valley gives birth to clarity." They moved deeper into the valley. The mist thinned. The air warmed. The river's sound grew stronger. The traveler felt something shifting. Not everything was clear, but something was undeniably changing, like a dawn rising somewhere inside him. He looked at the guide. "What will I find at the end of the valley?" The guide's eyes softened. "The version of you God has been shaping all along." The river shimmered ahead of them. The night sky brightened faintly with the first hints of dawn. The traveler breathed deeply, and for the first time in a very long time, his heart did not hurt the same way it once did. A new chapter, tender, fragile, and full of quiet hope, had begun. The sun dipped behind the ridge as Daniel walked down the quiet path, that same worn Bible tucked under his arm. The village around him glowed with soft orange light, and the world felt a little gentler than it had that morning. He didn't rush. There was a peaceful weight in his steps, as if the ground beneath him finally agreed with his direction. He kept thinking about that moment by the lakeshore, when hope finally sank into his bones. It hadn't been loud. It hadn't been dramatic. It had slipped into him like a whisper that knew its place. And somehow that was enough. But as he walked toward the village square, something strange happened. He noticed people gathering in little circles, talking quietly, glancing around with worried eyes. A few children ran past him, their faces pale. The older men leaned on their canes, whispering to each other. Even the birds that usually filled the trees had gone strangely still. Daniel slowed down. The air felt different, tighter, unsure, like something was coming. He saw Ruth near the fountain, her hands pressed to her chest. She looked shaken, almost trembling. When she spotted him, she hurried over, her voice low and trembling. "Daniel, have you heard?"
He shook his head.
"What happened?" She swallowed hard. "Jonah never came home." The name struck him like a stone. Jonah, that stubborn, brave boy who always carried too much on his shoulders. The boy who, despite all his fear, had the softest heart in the village. The boy Daniel felt responsible for, even if he never said it out loud. Ruth grabbed Daniel's arm. "He went out to the ridge early this morning. Some of the men just came back. They found his bag, near the cliff, but not him. Daniel felt the world tilt for a moment.
Not this.
Not Jonah. He closed his eyes. The wind blew over them, cold and sharp. The ridge. The old cliff overlook. That path was dangerous, especially when the fog thickened. And today it had been foggy all morning. Is there a search party? Daniel asked quietly. Ruth nodded, wiping her eyes. They're out there right now. But Daniel, it's getting dark. They might stop soon. Daniel didn't waste another second. He stepped back, breath tightening like a knot in his chest. I'm going. Ruth grabbed him again. No, Daniel, please. The fog is rolling in again. You'll lose your way. But he looked at her with a steadiness he didn't recognize in himself a week ago. I can't leave him out there. She knew there was no stopping him. She let go slowly, closing her eyes in a short, pained prayer. Daniel turned and ran. The forest path swallowed him as he went, branches scratching his arms, roots catching his boots. The deeper he went, the darker it grew. A thick silver fog began to seep between the trees, curling around his legs, rising like breath from the earth. As he climbed toward the ridge, he whispered to himself, not out of fear, but out of something deeper. Faith is the substance, the evidence, the unseen. The words calmed the shaking inside him. By the time he reached the clearing near the ridge, the fog had become almost impossible to see through. He stopped, breathing hard, listening for any sign of life. Nothing. Just wind. Just silence. Then faintly a sound. A voice.
Weak.
Strained. Help. Daniel's heart jumped. Jonah, he shouted. The fog swallowed his voice. He took a few steps forward, reaching out, afraid of the drop. The ground sloped sharply here, and the cliff edge was only a few feet ahead. Jonah, where are you? Another faint cry rose up, this time lower, below the ridge. Daniel crawled on his knees, feeling the ground carefully until he reached the edge. The fog shifted, revealing a narrow ledge 10 or 12 feet down. And there, gripping a thin root with one hand, was Jonah. His face was pale, streaked with dirt and fear. His legs dangled over open space. A jagged rock supported part of his weight, but it looked ready to crumble. Daniel's breath caught. Jonah, I'm here. The boy looked up, eyes filling with tears of relief. I slipped. I tried to climb back up. I can't. Don't move, Daniel said, voice steady even though his heart pounded. He looked around desperately. The fog hid everything, no ropes, no branches long enough to reach. No one else was nearby. He had only one choice. And it was insane. He climbed over the edge. Not far, just enough to lower himself halfway down the cliff. The rock scraped his hands, and his boots slid against the dirt. He grabbed the thickest root he could find, praying and held. His body dangled awkwardly, every muscle shaking. Jonah, he whispered, listen to me. You have to reach up. I can't, Jonah cried. I'll fall. Daniel closed his eyes, breathing slowly. You know me, he said softly. I won't let go, but you have to try. The boy hesitated. Tears dripped down his face. His small hand reached a little higher, then slipped again. Daniel's heart nearly stopped. Look at me, he said firmly. Jonah lifted his head. You remember that story I told you last week? About how faith isn't pretending everything is easy. It's choosing to trust in the middle of fear. Jonah nodded weakly. This is that moment. Not someday. Not when life gets better. Right now. For a long second, Jonah didn't move. Then, trembling, he lifted his hand again. Daniel stretched down as far as he could, fingers straining, body burning. Their fingertips brushed. Come on, Daniel whispered. Just a little more. Jonah pushed upward with every bit of strength he had left. Their hands locked. Daniel gripped hard, pulling Jonah up inch by inch, his muscles screaming. Dirt rained down. The root above him creaked dangerously. But he didn't stop. He pulled again and again until Jonah's foot found a small foothold. Then Daniel shifted his weight and dragged him toward the ledge. One last heave. And suddenly they were both on solid ground. Jonah collapsed against him, sobbing. Daniel held him tight, breath shaking out of him in exhausted relief. "It's okay," Daniel whispered into his hair. "You're safe now." The fog drifted around them, quiet and silver like a curtain falling after a long, brutal scene. Daniel sat back, letting the weight of what had just happened settle slowly in his chest. After a few minutes, Jonah pulled away, wiping his face with shaking hands. I thought I was going to die." Daniel looked at him gently. "I know, but you didn't." Jonah stared at him. "How did you find me?" Daniel exhaled. "I followed the voice I almost didn't believe I could hear." Jonah nodded slowly, understanding sinking into him. They stood up, leaning on each other as they walked back toward the path. The forest looked different now, calmer, almost protective. The fog had begun to lift, as if the danger had passed. At the edge of the clearing, a group of villagers appeared, running toward them with lanterns. When they saw Jonah, cries of relief filled the forest. Ruth was the first to reach them. She threw her arms around Jonah, tears streaming down her face. Then she turned to Daniel, gripping his hands. "You brought him back," she whispered. Daniel shook his head gently. He held on. "I just reached out." But the villagers knew better. They saw something in his eyes, not pride, not fear, but a quiet certainty that hadn't been there before. As they walked back together, lanterns lighting the path, Daniel looked up at the night sky. Something in him settled. Faith wasn't just a verse in a chapter. It was this moment, this rescue, this breath, this heartbeat. It was stepping toward the impossible, even when everything inside him trembled. And deep down, Daniel knew this journey wasn't over. Not even close. Something larger was still unfolding, something that would draw him deeper than anything he had faced yet. The first rays of morning stretched over the village, spilling golden light across rooftops and winding streets. The night's fog had vanished, replaced by a quiet clarity that made every leaf, every stone, every face stand out as if painted by hand. Daniel walked slowly through the square, Jonah beside him, the boy still trembling but safe. The villagers had returned to their routines, yet there was a softness in their movements, a collective exhale after hours of fear. Daniel paused near the fountain, watching water ripple in the early light. It caught the sun in tiny sparks, dancing like fragments of hope scattered across the surface. For the first time, Daniel felt that hope wasn't fragile. Not here. Not anymore. He could feel it steady in his chest, mingling with every heartbeat. Ruth approached, carrying a small basket of bread and fruit. She offered it quietly, smiling through the fatigue that still lined her face. "You and Jonah need to eat," she said softly. "Both of you look like you've been through the storm and the river." Daniel chuckled lightly. "We have. And yet, I've never felt more alive." She studied him for a moment. "It's more than just surviving, isn't it?" "Yes," he admitted. "It's more than that. It's faith." Ruth tilted her head, curious. "Faith in what?" He looked down at Jonah, who was picking at a piece of bread but stealing glances at him every few seconds, hesitant but trusting. Daniel smiled. Faith in God. In his timing. In the unseen. Jonah's lips quivered into a small, shy smile. I think I understand now. Even when I was scared, he was there. Daniel nodded, reaching out to squeeze his shoulder.
Exactly.
Even in the moments we think we're alone, faith walks with us. It doesn't erase fear. It teaches us to move through it. The sun climbed higher, warming the stones of the square, and for the first time in weeks, the air felt light. Birds had returned, filling the morning with songs. Daniel breathed in deeply, letting the crisp air wash away the lingering tension of the night. He thought about the cliff, the fog, the river, the valley of surrender, every step that had seemed impossible until it wasn't. Every moment that had required trust when reason screamed to run. And he realized, quietly but powerfully, that faith wasn't just about seeing the path. It was about walking it one trembling step at a time. The village's baker waved from his doorway. A few children ran past, laughing, chasing one another around the fountain. The ordinary rhythm of life continued, and Daniel felt part of it now in a way he hadn't before. Life itself had become sacred, ordinary and miraculous all at once. Ruth looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you think this changes things for you?" Daniel considered it, his gaze sweeping the village, the hills beyond, the sky stretching endlessly overhead. "It has to," he said finally. "Faith isn't a single moment. It's a journey, and tonight, we've learned that journey never truly ends. But we can trust it. We can trust him." Jonah's small hand found Daniel's. "Does that mean I have to keep stepping even when I'm afraid?" he asked. Daniel knelt to meet his eyes.
Yes.
"Every time. But you won't do it alone. And sometimes stepping isn't enough. You also have to surrender what you cannot control. That's where trust begins." Jonah nodded, absorbing the words, and for the first time, a spark of determination shone in his young eyes. Daniel saw it clearly, the same spark that had guided him through the darkest valleys. The morning deepened. Villagers moved purposefully now, opening shops, carrying baskets, exchanging greetings. Life was returning, and Daniel felt that the night's events had stitched an invisible thread of courage and hope through every heart. Every struggle, every fear that had seemed insurmountable, now felt like a stepping stone in a larger story, a story guided by something far greater than the fear that had haunted them. Daniel walked toward the fountain, kneeling to wash his hands in the cool water. Jonah mirrored him, dipping his small hands beside Daniel's. The water glimmered, reflecting the rising sun and their faces, tired, yet alive, weary but renewed. A soft breeze stirred, carrying scents of baked bread, fresh earth, and distant flowers. Daniel closed his eyes, letting it fill him completely. In that moment, clarity washed over him. The trials, the fear, the uncertainty, none of it had been wasted. Every trembling step, every moment of surrender, every heartbeat of trust had led him here, to a place where faith was no longer abstract, but living, breathing, and fiercely real. The guide had said this journey wasn't over. Daniel understood that now more than ever, faith would call him again, challenge him again, demand more than he thought he could give. But he no longer feared it. Each challenge would be another valley to surrender in, another river to cross, another cliff to trust God on. And with each, his faith would grow, not in ease or comfort, but in the raw reality of life itself. Jonah tugged at his sleeve. "Daniel, what do we do now?" Daniel smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "We live, we step, we trust, and we help others find their courage, just like you did tonight." Jonah's face brightened, and they walked together toward the heart of the village. The streets were waking, light spilling across every wall, every cobblestone. Daniel felt a rhythm in the air, a quiet pulse of life, of people surviving, struggling, but moving forward, step by step. He paused near the fountain, looking out toward the hills. The valley, the cliffs, the river. All of it lay behind him now, but the memory was vivid. It wasn't just a story of fear and danger. It was a story of faith, surrender, trust, and courage. And he carried it within him. Daniel knelt again beside the fountain, pressing a hand to the cool stone. "Thank you," he whispered, "for every step, every moment, every unseen hand that guided me." Jonah knelt beside him, silent, letting the quiet absorb him, feeling the same pulse of courage that Daniel did. For a long while, they stayed there, two figures bathed in golden light, surrounded by life slowly returning to rhythm. The village around them was waking, yet for Daniel, time had paused, allowing him to breathe, to reflect, to understand the depth of the journey. Finally, Daniel stood, brushing his hands on his pants. Jonah followed, looking up at him with renewed determination. The village square stretched ahead, bright, alive, full of possibility. Daniel took a deep breath. The fear of the night, the trials of the valley, the cliffs and fog, all of it had passed. What remained was faith, alive, tender, and indestructible. He looked at Jonah, at Ruth, at the villagers beginning their day, and felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. Faith wasn't a chapter. It was life itself, messy, unpredictable, sometimes terrifying, but always leading him forward. Always showing him the way, even when he couldn't see it. He smiled softly. The dawn had arrived. Not just on the village, not just in the hills, but in him. Faith had found its home. And as they walked toward the heart of the village, the sun rising fully now, Daniel knew this was only the beginning of a lifetime of steps of courage, surrender, trust, and love. Steps that would carry him forward, one trembling, faithful, unstoppable step at a time. The wind brushed past, warm and steady. The river sang quietly in the distance. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel's heart was fully still, fully at peace, fully alive.